Hey everyone, I'm Hoki Hoshi, and today I'm going to show you some Forza detective skills that will help you piece together locked tunes so you can have full tuning freedom. If you've ever loved a locked tune but hated the arrow they chose or the wheels, or maybe the gearing is just slightly off and you just want to change one thing, well then this video is for you. Now I need to clarify right off the bat that this isn't some easy one-click hack to unlock all of your downloaded tunes. Instead, it takes some trial and error, some time, and some effort to get close to the tune that you're trying to replicate. There are some things we can figure out for certain, but some values will always be hidden behind that locked tune. Now with that disclaimer out of the way, let's dive into this video and explain the setup we have here. This Mazda Miata that we have here has been modified and tuned completely without my input by my fiance, and I have no idea what any of the values are. So what I'm going to do is hop in another Miata and try to replicate her tune exactly, and then we'll come back at the end and see how close I got. Alright, so we are in my car now, and the first thing you should do right when you download the tune is copy down the basic info for the tune. So go ahead and look at this window. The tune here is my fiance's, and you can see she's running 351 horsepower, 284 torque, so on and so forth. It's class 812 or PI 812 S1, and it's rear wheel drive. So that's good basic info. If you aren't matching all of that, well, something's different on your tune. So save that on your phone. I usually just take a picture of it, and then you can move on to visuals. Alright, so back in her car, there's a few things we can look at just to figure out some of the mods that she used. Of course, we're looking at the Forza rear wing as well as the Forza front splitter. She also chose the max chassis reinforcement mod because there is a roll bar in the car, and I believe in most cars the max chassis reinforcement will always add either a roll cage or a roll bar to the car. And then moving over to the wheels, looks like maybe 17-inch rotiforms on there, but again, just kind of visually match those. And same goes with the tire compound as well as the brakes. That looks like an upgraded tire compound, maybe street or sport, and I think those are the stock brakes. But again, you're just looking to visually match. For example, upgraded brakes will either have drilled or slotted rotors, and they'll also have red calipers if they're the max upgrade. So let's go ahead and make those visual modifications, and then we can come back and look at some of the other mods. So we've made some adjustments, and you can see that it's looking a lot more like her car. A few things I forgot to mention though are that you can look at the tires to determine the tire width, and she was definitely using some sort of mods there, so I just kind of took a guess at max tire width for front and rear, but again, we can play with that later. And you can also look at the suspension ride height. You can only adjust ride height on race, rally, or drift suspension, and her car was very low. It might have been as low as you can get it. So she was using one of those three, and you can determine at least roughly between those by looking at the steering angle, which is how much the front wheels turn when you have them on full steering lock. And the drift suspension will turn more than the other two, which is I think what she was using. So we've gone ahead and done that. Now there are a few other things we can determine by using her tune. So let's swap over to her car and take a look at those. So back in her car, we can take it for a quick test drive, and you can see that it's shifting much quicker than the stock car. There are definitely either clutch or transmission mods going on here. Maybe probably both, because this is shifting really quick. The other thing we can take a look at is pull out the telemetry, and you can see that there is a non-zero boost number. That means that she has either a turbo or supercharger equipped, and it also boosts up to 8 psi. So that can tell us what mods she picked for the turbo or supercharger. We just want to match that max psi number. So let's go ahead, hop into the garage, and we'll see what we're working with. Back in the garage, the first adjustment I'll make is changing the aspiration of the car. Now you can hear subtle differences between a turbocharger or a supercharger, and I think that hers was supercharged. So I'm going to go ahead and add a positive displacement supercharger, and I'm also going to modify both the clutch, which I believe she probably max upgraded. It did shift really quick, And I'm not going to do a max upgrade here. I think I'm going to leave it at a sport transmission. Now from here on out, we want to reference those numbers that we found at the beginning of downloading the tune and try to match those numbers at least as close as we can. You might get one little thing off here and there, but I'm not going to record this whole section, of course, because it does take longer than anything else. This is the most time-consuming process. So I'm going to go ahead, mess around for a little bit, and I'll come back with some results for you. Alright, quick little addition here. I did forget to mention there are two other mods you can tell for certain, one being the camshaft and the other being the displacement. Now the camshaft can be determined by how high the car redlines. Her car redlined at about 7,500 RPM in line with these race cams, so I know she used those. And the displacement is one of those numbers we saved from the beginning of the video, 2,400 or 2.4 liters, again in line with the race engine block, so I know she used that. Now both of these will change if you engine swap, but that can be easily determined just by listening to the engine, and I know she's still using the stock block. So these are two more mods you can figure out for certain, and now I will dive back into this for real this time and be back in a second. And we're back, and as you can see, all of my numbers are now matching her tune. However, you will have probably noticed that her weight is green, meaning better, and that means that there is actually a mod difference somewhere. If it's weight, you're usually looking at something like the flywheel or maybe the anti-roll bars, but if any of the numbers are either green or red, even though they're the same, that does mean there's a mod difference somewhere. Now, I'm going to leave it as is. I'm just going to kind of take that as a loss. And I know it might seem like I skipped a lot here, going straight from just the things we knew for certain right into matching all of her mods, almost exactly anyway. But I did actually time myself, and the whole process only took 5 minutes and 40 seconds. And you'd be surprised how quickly you can start to kind of eliminate some things and narrow it down. Just a point of advice, always start by matching power and torque, and then worry about weight and weight distribution. Now, a couple of things I noticed about her tune that I want to correct quick. She was definitely using a supercharger, but it was not the one I selected, which I think was the positive displacement supercharger. It was the other one. I figured that out because the positive displacement supercharger had way more torque compared to its horsepower, and I just couldn't get those numbers to match up. So I switched to the other supercharger and everything fell into place. The other thing, she was definitely not using the drift suspension. I took both cars out and looked at their steering angle, and it was pretty easy to tell that she was not using drift suspension. It had way more angle than her car, so I did swap that back to race suspension. So with the mods pretty much matched up here, it's time to dive into tuning, and there are a few more things we can figure out for certain about the tune. So we'll head back into her car on the road, and I'll show you those. Now, tuning is going to be more difficult because unlike with mods, we have no way to verify if what we've selected is correct, but we can make some visual approximations as well as using the telemetry to help figure out what some of the values are. Now, the first obvious one is going to be ride height. Her car is pretty low here, so I'm just going to set it to maximum lowness and modify it if I need to. You can also, though, let's pop up telemetry here, look at both camber and tire pressure. Now for camber, make sure you're on at least a mostly level surface, and we can see that the front camber is set at -2.9 and the rear camber is set at -3.2. Now with tire pressure, just remember that as temperature drops, pressures will drop. So I'm guessing that even though it's showing us here that the pressure is 30.4, she probably set it higher, around 32 psi, but since the temperature is around 45 degrees, the pressure's dropped. So just make sure to switch back and forth, do that little bit of trial and error, and make sure that when the PSIs match, the temperatures match as well. Once you have those figured out, there's only one more thing we can figure out for certain with the tuning, and that's gearing. Luckily, I know that my fiance only upgraded the transmission enough to unlock final drive tuning, not individual gear tuning, so this is going to be a pretty easy step for me, but either way, here's what you want to do. Make sure you're not in auto mode, and redline each gear and record what speed it tops out at. For me, first was 25, and second was 43. Now, since I only have to mess with final drive, I can stop there and just make sure that those two gears match. If they do, I'll know that the rest of the gears match. But if you have to tune every individual gear, keep going up all of the gears and just make sure that they all top out at the same speed. This should mean that all your gear ratios match the one of the locked tune. And now we start getting into some muddy waters. The only way to adjust damping, anti-roll bars, and suspension stiffness is by feel. So what I can do is rock the car back and forth and try to figure out roughly where some of the values are. The front suspension seems to be pitching down a lot, and overall the car seems really soft, so I'm guessing for a pretty soft suspension setting. And it also seems really responsive, which implies stiffer anti-roll bars and a good damping ratio. But I should point out, just from personal experience, most tuners won't play too much with damping. If anything, many will increase the bump stiffness ratio. This brings us to a good overall point that the better you get at tuning cars yourself and recognizing common patterns, the easier you'll be able to unlock other people's locked tunes, because you'll be able to figure out what would make the most sense in a certain situation. Back to the tune at hand, we still have to look at braking, aero, and differential. Now you can get an idea of brake bias by seeing when and how the brakes heat up, as you can see I'm doing here, and you can get a feel of aero by comparing top speeds between your tune and the locked tune. Finally, the differential is another setting that sadly just comes down to the feel. So I'm going to take all of this info, throw it into a tune, and when I come back, we're going to compare my tune versus my fiance's, and we'll see how close I got. So we've got her tune up top, mine down on bottom, and I'm going to do a quick fast-forwarded run-through of all of the mods and all of the tuning, so that at least you can see them just for the sake of clarity, and then when we get to the end, I will tally up what was right, what was close, and what was wrong. Now I know I got a few of the mods wrong because of that little weight discrepancy, so there'll be a few things flipped around there, but I know if I spent a couple more minutes working it out, I probably could have locked down the mods. I'm pretty confident with where everything else was, just because all the numbers matched up, so there's really not too much variation there could have been. As far as the tuning goes though, now obviously there are so many minute little differences with the tuning window that if I get something close enough where it would be pretty much near as makes no difference, I'm going to count that as right. Close is going to be where it's kind of in that same ballpark of, okay, the suspension is relatively soft. It would get a similar feel, and then wrong is just going to be pretty obvious if I was just nowhere close or not really close enough to where it would really make a handling difference. I'm going to count that as wrong. Another thing to point out here is that I did tell my fiance to tune this car completely randomly, just selecting whatever she felt like. So when you're working through a locked tune yourself, keep in mind that the tuner will likely have been following familiar formulas, sticking with even numbers, and this tune in general will just make a little bit more sense, and that will really help you to lock down those right numbers. So now that we've made a run through everything, let's make a tally of what was right, what was close, and what was just flat out wrong. So starting with mods, I got 30 of the mods correct, and I got 4 wrong. Now again, this was just because of that little weight discrepancy, like the flywheel, the rear anti-roll bar, and I think the rear diff were just all flipped around a little bit. And then for the tuning, I got 7 aspects of tuning spot on. 13 were close enough to where it probably wouldn't make much of a handling difference, and I got 2 things just flat out wrong. The rear toe was about a degree off, and the deceleration setting on the rear diff was, I think, about 30% off. So overall, we did pretty good. If I give a half point to all the aspects that were close, it was 88% the same as the locked tune. Now, if I would have spent some more time, got those mods right, maybe worked out a couple kinks with those tuning aspects that I got wrong, could have definitely pushed that up, but it all just comes down to how much time you want to invest in trying to unlock these locked tunes. Now, overall, if I take out time just for recording and editing some stuff, I spent only about 25 minutes to get 88% the same tune as the locked tune. Of course, you don't always want to spend upwards of a half hour on every locked tune you download, so this should be seen as more of a niche skill, but I'm a huge advocate for learning to tune yourself, and I still think this is a valuable skill set to have. Sometimes it can be helpful if you're struggling with tuning a car yourself, and you just want to kind of pull apart someone else's tune that feels really good to drive. I know there's a bit of a controversial aspect to this video, and I think the first step you should always take is reaching out to the tune creator and seeing if they can help offer some advice. But if all else fails, just know that there are some detective tools you can use to help piece together a locked tune. And that just about wraps it up for this video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was valuable information to you. I was a bit on the fence about whether or not to make it, but again, hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.